Good evening, everyone. This is the first lecture for the course Structural Reliability organized by the PMRF ISSS teaching program. I am Trisha Chakraborty. I am a PMRF scholar. I am a PhD student and second year PhD student at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And we are looking at the topic of structural reliability. The topics to be covered first, I will go through the topics that I plan to cover in this course. The classes are from 7 to 9 p.m. every Wednesday and Thursday for 3 weeks. So the today is 18th September, the first is, so the classes will be on 18th, 19th, then 25th, 26th, and 2nd and 3rd October. That will be the last class. So the broad outline of this course and the topics to be covered are the review of probability theory, because structural reliability hinges heavily on the backgrounds of probability theory and statistics. The probability theory course is basically what is expected to have been covered. Yes, the I won't go beyond what is generally covered in an undergraduate engineering course, but that but the review is important because there are some details that will come here again and again, and as engineers we may not have encountered them since we studied them in the first year of college. So review of probability theory. Then we will define limit state functions and derive the partial safety factors. The limit state function is a term commonly used in civil engineering. By the way, this course is going to be mainly focusing on civil engineering, because I'm a civil engineer, and that is where I have applied structural reliability in my MTech research work. So limit state function is used to define the various is used to account for the various ways in which a structure can fail basically. So for example, there is one called the collapse limit state that says that the structure should not collapse. So the load that comes on the structure should be less than the overall capacity of the structure. That will be the collapse limit state. Then there are some serviceability limit states that are related to deflections or strains. There will be, for example, in a beam, there could be a certain limit that it can 10 is the maximum amount we are going to allow it to deflect at the midpoint. Then the serviceability limit state would be that the deflection at the midpoint of the beam should be less than 10 So this is how limit state functions are defined in the terms of an inequality, basically that the demand should be less than the capacity. That means that the limit state has not failed. And then we will derive partial safety factors. This concept comes from from the concept of limit state design that is most commonly used in all all civil engineering structural codes across the world today, including the Indian standard codes. So partial safety factors are some factors that are applied on the working load and the working capacity. Like the working load is what I actually expect to be coming on the structure, and I will multiply that with a factor greater than 1, because I want to make a design safe. So if I expect 100 kilonewton load to be coming on my structure, I would suppose multiply it by a factor of 1.5, make it 15 kilonewton. So if my structure is safe against 15 kilonewton, it will definitely be safe against 10 kilonewton. So that is a way of actually increasing the safety of a structure. And similarly, for the capacity of my material or my structure, I would use a partial safety factor in the denominator, because if the structure has a capacity of 20 kilonewton or 20 megapascal, I would put safety factor of suppose 1.1 and bring it down to something around 18 megapascal, so that if thus I would not allow the load to exceed 1.18 at all, let alone 20. So partial safety factors, both partial safety factors on the load and the capacity, work on making the design safer. And and this is what reliability all is all about. Reliability is related to safety. So the reliability, there is an reliability index that we would be defining later on, that is related directly to the probability of failure of the structure. And as we know, that design is basically a trade-off between safety and economy. So we cannot keep on making a structure safer and safer and safer by doing it. Yeah, by giving it like huge sections, very strong materials, because then the cost is also going to be increased, right? So we want there to be a balance between the two. The structure should be safe up to a certain limit, certainly, but there somewhere we have to draw the line as well, taking into account economic considerations. That is how structural reliability based codes in some of the across the world, like the European standards, the EN codes, and there are AC standards, the American codes from Denmark, Netherlands. There are a lot of codes from around the world that have certain structural safety based criteria. Yes, so basically, the reliability based codes define certain safety standards that must be adhered to, and that is what the research and reliability is all about. Then we will look at simulation methods. Then we will look at a study of reliability. So there are two kinds of methods. One are the simulation methods. There will be a special emphasis on Monte Carlo methods. What simulation means is that we would uh, model our structure with incorporating certain uncertainties. For example, if for a lot of material or geometric parameters or the load parameters, we will not consider them as deterministic or fixed at a certain value. Rather, we would consider them as to have a probabilistic distribution. So they will have a mean, they will have a standard deviation, they will have a distribution like normal, log normal, uniform, etc. And then we would simulate the structure, like we would generate the structure several times, several thousands or 10 million times. Each time each time those parameters will be generated as a random variable. So the yield strength of steel, for example, in my structure may not would not be the same every time, because it will have a mean, it will have a standard deviation, and I'm going to simulate or generate it every time. So if the mean is 250 MPa, sometime in one model it will be 240 MPa, in one model it will be 255 MPa, and so on. And then we would analyze the structure every time to see if if it is safe or it is failing. And that is how we will find out the probability of failure using the law of large numbers, that says that one of the probability axioms that says that as we increase the number of trials up to infinity, the ratio of the number of failures by the number of trials will tend to the actual probability of failure of the structure. And Monte Carlo sim method is one of the most basic of these simulation methods. Then we will look at second moment and transformation methods for studying reliability. These are some more analytical methods. The simulation methods are numerical methods, and these are analytical methods. And finally, we will look at system reliability. Initially, most of this course will be dealing with element reliability of one element. We are like we are not going to look at a building or a truss as a whole. We will look at just one element, like a truss member, a beam, a column, or something. And then because the concepts are the same, like the concepts can are enough to be studied on an element. And then we are going to look at system reliability, how systems are assembled, like series and parallel systems, and how the reliability system reliability is related to the element reliabilities. This is the course structure. Module 1 consists of two classes, today and tomorrow. So 18th and 19th September will cover review of probability theory, measures of structural reliability, partial safety factors, and the limit state function. Module 2 will be next week, so 25th and 26th September, I guess. Types of uncertainty, risk assessment, probability of failure, integration and simulation methods, special emphasis on Monte Carlo method and variance reduction. Module 3 will have one class, 2nd October, second moment and transformation methods, including the Hasselhoff-Lind method, Neteff and Rosenblatt transformations, first order reliability methods that are known as form, and second order reliability methods known as SORM. And in the final class on 3rd October, module 4, will look at system reliability, load, material and system modeling, series and parallel systems, response surfaces, etc. Now, as I said, the focus will be on application of reliability method to civil engineering. This area is broadly called risk and reliability, and it has had a lot of research going on in the last 100 years. And so, with that, I move on to the first lecture, the review of probability theory. Probability theory. Probability is a numerical measure of the likelihood that an event occurs relative to a set of alternative events that do not occur. For example, we toss a coin. I want to measure the probability of getting a heads. Then I want the numerical measure of the likelihood of getting a heads. There is this event relative to an alternative set of alternative events that do not occur. That is getting a tails. Or if I look at set of alternative events, so that consider rolling a die. There are six possibilities, getting one, two, three, four, five, six on the top face. So if I want the probability of getting a two, then what I want is getting two. 1 second. So getting a 2 is my favorable event, and the set of alternative events that do not occur will be getting a 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or similarly with tossing two coins, the probabilities are head, tails, both heads, both tails, and one head and one tails. So if I want to look at the probability of getting one head and a one tail, then that is my favorable event, and the unfavorable events are getting both heads and both tails. Set of all to study probability of an event, set of all possible events must be known. That is known as the sample space. So if I am rolling a die, I should consider all the possibilities, like getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the top surface. Then there could be something that the none of it it falls on one edge and does not actually show anything on the top face, or all the possible events that I'm going to consider. The determination of the probability that an event occurs can be based on a priori assumptions about the underlying mechanisms of governing events. relative frequency of empirical observations in the past, intuitive and subjective assumptions. Here, what we are looking at is uh, we know that from intuition, we know that if I am rolling a die with six faces, the probability of getting each number individually is 1 by 6. So that is what is meant by determination of the probability of an event occurring. It can be based on all these. The probability of an event E is denoted by P E given X. This dash is known as is referred to as given. So P of E given X, probability of E given X, where P is a probability operator. Uh, Bar X notes the condition subject to X or given X, where X denote whatever may be known or assumed in determining P E given X. Any probability depends on the state of knowledge or ignorance at the time that the probability is calculated. So, as we gain more and more knowledge about an event, our probability measures are going to get more refined. And seen in this way, all probabilities are conditional, as indicated by X. In many cases, P E given X will be denoted simply P of E, the state of X being state of nature X being understood. X might not be explicit. X might be all the factors that are affecting the probability event that might not be explicit, so that can be taken as an implicit factor. And P probability of an event E occurring is simply denoted P of E. Now we look at some at the three main axioms of probability. The probability PE of an event E is a real non-negative number which ranges between 0 to 1, both included. So the probability of, for example, if I am tossing at like rolling a die, then the probability of, if I am looking at the probability, the set of the probabilities of getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then the probability of that collective event will be 1, because I know that one any one of the numbers I'm going to get for sure. And the same way, the probability of getting a 7 or probability of getting 100 is 0, because if I know that that is not going to happen. And it ranges between 0 to 1, because 1 is the occurring of all of the total probability of all the events that can occur. The probability of an inevitable event C is PC is 1. Hence the probability P0 of an impossible event equals 0. Addition rule, there is an additional rule. The probability that either or both of two events E1 and E2 occurs is P E1. This is a union sign. P E1 union E2 is P E1 plus P E2 minus P E1 intersection E2. So what does this union and intersection means? Union means, as is defined, is either or both of two events E1 and E2 occur. So that includes P E1 occurring, E2 occurring, like E1 occurring and E2 not occurring, E2 occurring and E1 not occurring, and E1 and E2 both occurring. That is what is meant by P E1 union E2. And P E1 intersection E2 is the probability of both E1 and E2 occurring. So this is the formula that we have to remember. And hence, for two mutually exclusive events, P E1 union E2 is P E1 plus P E2. What does mutually exclusive event mean? Mutually exclusive events, as the term suggests, means that there are two events that cannot happen together. For example, if I get a heads in tossing a coin, I cannot get a tails. If it is raining today, the weather cannot be clear today, like that. So for two mutually exclusive events, it automatically follows that this P E1 intersection E2, this cannot happen, because even the probability of the two events occurring simultaneously is 0. So we ignore this last term and we write that P E1 union E2 is P E1 plus P E2. These are the only possibilities that can happen in the union, that only E1 occurs or only E2 occurs. Properties of probability. There is a multiplication rule. The probability that events E1 and E2 both occur can be written as the conditional probability of one with respect to the other. That is, there is a symmetry in E1 and E2. P E1 union E2 is P E1 given E2 into P E2. It equal to P E2 given E1 into P E1. They are symmetric. As I said, what E1 given E2 means, that the probability of E1 when I know that P E2 has already occurred. So that is not the same as P E1. And if E1 and E2 are independent, we know this. P E1 given E2 is P E1, and P E1 intersection E2 is P E1 E2. This is follows from this, like if they are independent, these formulas are holding. Then there is a complementary property. If E bar is the event that E does not occur, then PE union E bar is PE plus PE bar equal to 1. So See, what this means is that I know that if E is an event in my overall sample space, either E1 occurs or E1 does not occur. If E1 occurring and E1 not occurring, E occurring and E not occurring are my two events, then either of the two has to happen. So the union of both is one. And since they are mutually exclusive, this union automatically leads to this. That is my formula here. That P, if they are mutually exclusive, the union is just the sum of the individual probabilities. And there's a conditional probability for multiplication rule. P e1 given e2 is P e1 intersection e2 by P e2. This follows from this formula actually. You can just, if I shift the P e2 to the denominator, I will get this formula. And similarly, P e2 given e1 is P e1 intersection e2 divided by P e1, because they are symmetric. These formulas will obviously be symmetric because there is no inherent bias in nature about two events e1 and e2. There is a very important and useful probability theorem called total probability theorem. By virtue of the multiplication rule, it can be derived that for events ei, e1, e2, e3, e4, like that up to en, suppose there are n events that are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Mutually exclusive means that no two events can occur together. Like E1 and E2 cannot occur together, E1 and E3 cannot occur together, E1 and En cannot occur together, and similarly, no two events can occur together among my set of n events, and they are collectively exhaustive. That means that covering all possibilities without overlap. That means that they cover all the possibilities. That means that since e1 and e2 and none of them can occur together, but one of them must occur. That means that whatever possibilities are there, these n events are covering all the possibilities without overlapping. Without overlapping comes from the mutually exclusive thing. So pa is a random event or a collection of events that we don't know. We have to define. Pa is pa given e1 into PE1 plus PA given E2 into PE2 plus, and so on. It will go on adding up to the EN term, PA given EN into PEN, and from that there is another theorem follows, that is the Bayes theorem. That is this is shown as, it is just a modified version of stating the total probability theorem, but they are both very useful in solving numericals. Pa given ec is Pa intersection ec divided by Pec equal to Pec given a Pa by Pec, where a is an event conditional on conditioning event ec. This can be expanded to the case where there are several conditioning events ei, I equal to 1 to 1 2 3 4 to n. This is how it is shown. Pa given e1 intersection e2 intersection e3 give up to en is P, look at the last term, P E1 intersection E2 intersection E3 up to En given PA into PA divided by P E1 intersection up to En. It will become clear when a couple of problems are solved. So this is my problem. Suppose we have a medical test for a certain disease. Here are the relevant possibilities. The prevalence of the disease, that is probability that a randomly selected person has a disease, is Pt equal to 0.01. Probability of testing positive given that you have the disease sensitivity is Pd given T given D equal to zero point 0.9. That means that just because when you have the disease does not mean that you are going to be tested positive. So the test is also not foolproof. So there is a possibility that I have the disease but I am not tested positive. So, and probability of testing positive given that you do not have the disease, false positive rate is T given DC is 0.05. So that means that, again, so when you are testing, a person having the disease might be diagnosed as not having it, and a person not having the disease may also be tested as having it. So there are some possibilities of disaster. So this is the question, and we want to. These are the possibilities, and why is this DC? This is called the complement. This is also represented as D with a bar on top, as I showed E bar before. Is a complement. That means D plus DC is 1. P of D plus P of DC is 1. So either I have the disease or I don't have the disease. Me not having the disease is denoted by this term DC. So we want to find the probability that a person has the disease given that they are tested positive for it. That is PD given T. I'll wait for 5 minutes to solve for you to solve this question. Okay, we will move on to the solution. Okay, so step 1 is finding PT, the total probability of testing positive. To find PT, to find PT, we will use a law of total probability. PT is PT given D into PD plus PD given D complement into PD clock D complement, where PD complement is 1 minus PT, as I said, the probability of not having the disease, and PD complement so is 1 minus 0.01, that is 0.99, because here it was said that the probability of having the disease is 0.01, so the probability of not having the disease is 0.99. Okay, now we will substitute the values in this formula. PT is PT equal to PD even T 0.9, 0.9 that was given already in the question, and into PD, that is 0.01, plus PT given D complement 0.05, that was also given in the question, into PD complement, that is 0.99 as we have calculated. So this is 0.0585. Now, now I'm going to look at, yes, I'm going to look at step 2. We will apply Bayes theorem to find T given D given T. So what the question was is that we want P D given T. So first we have found out the total probability PT. Now we want this. So we know that because in this Bayes theorem we know that there is this term PT. So that is why that is what we found out earlier. P D given T is PT given D into PT by PT. We are substituting the known values. So this is zero point 0.5 into 0.1 by 0.0585. So this comes out to be 0.1538. So that means that the probability that a person actually has the disease, given that they are tested positive, is 15.38%. So probability multiplied by 100 gives a percentage of occurring. So this what this P D given T actually means is probability of the person having the disease, given that the test is positive. So that the event T is the test being positive, and event D is the person actually having the disease. So that is what our conclusion will be. Now we are going to look at we have looked at the basics of probability. Now we are going to slowly moving into statistics. So the first topic of statistics is random variables. In what follows, only the case of continuous random variables will be seen. For discrete random variables, the results will be the same as wherever we are using integration. If we use summation, it will be equivalent to it. We can represent a discrete random variable. So now, what is discrete and continuous random variables? A random variable capital X that can take discrete values. For example, rolling a die, if that is my random variable of the result of the die, it can have take six values: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are discrete. So that is a continuous random variable. Then there are so that is a discrete random variable. Then there are continuous random variables that can take all values in a certain range. For example, suppose we know that a bus arrives at a bus stop in every 15 minutes. So if you reach the bus stop at a particular time, you don't know when the previous bus has come. Then from the moment I reach the bus stand, that is I can consider as t equal to 0. From 15 minutes from now, anytime the bus can appear. So if the time of appearance of the bus t is my random variable, it can take any time between 0 to 15 in a continuous spectrum. So that is a continuous random variable. So now the probability that a given random variable x takes on a value less than or equal to small x. Small x will be a specific value is given by p x less than capital X less than small x. Capital X is my random variable and small x is a fixed value. It is called f of capital X of small x. That is my is that will be equal to, I will integrate this small f x epsilon d epsilon. Epsilon is just a variable of integration from minus infinity to x. This is just a basic like a very basic relationship in random variables, where capital Fx is defined as a cumulative distributive function or the CDF of the random variable x, and small f of x is defined as the probability density function or the PDF. So from since integrating the density function, I get the cumulative distribution function. So obviously it follows that by differentiating the distribution function, I will get the density function. So small f of x is d of capital F of x dx. Thus fx is not a probability; it is a local derivative. Specific cases of fx and f any function satisfying fx minus infinity equal to 0, fx plus infinity equal to 1, the distributive function is greater than 0 at all x values, the density function is greater than 0 at all x values, and for which the derivative fx small fx is equal to d capital fx dx. It is a possible cumulative distribution function. These two are important. So what this means is f of x of minus infinity. What does that mean? If I put of minus infinity means the small x is minus infinity. So this means the probability of capital X being less than equal to minus infinity. So of course the random variable has to be greater than minus infinity. So this probability will be 0. And when I put my plus infinity as x, capital X less than equal to plus infinity, it has to be 1. The probability of that happening has to be 1, because whatever value my random variable will take, it will be less than plus infinity, because that is the upper limit. So minus infinity is the lower limit, plus infinity is the upper limit. So these are two basic results of the cumulative distribution function values at minus infinity and plus infinity. So now this is another thing that we can here putting in this formula, we can find that the probability of my random variable ranging between a and b, these are also two fixed numbers, is probability of a less than equal to x plus probability of x less than equal to b. So probability of x less than equal to b is exactly equal to this expression. So I get this, my integration minus infinity to b fx dx, and probability of a less than x is a complement of p x less than a. So it will be 1 minus p x less than a. So that will be this, from there we get this term. So it will be integration minus infinity to b fx dx minus minus infinity to a fx dx. That is, this is the cumulative distribution function of f of fx at the point b, where x, the small x is b, and this is a cumulative distribution function at the point a where small x is a. A distribution may be described by a number of derived properties commonly called moments, without specific reference to either the density function or the distribution functions. Also, for discrete functions, the probability density function is replaced by the probability mass function. Now we are going to look at the moments, these moments that can be used to characterize a random variable. That's all. Yes, so the first moment of a random variable is also called the mean. This is the weighted average of all the values that a random variable can take. So E of x, this E is called the expectation. Expectation of x is also called the mean of x, means mu x. Stands for the term mean. Is integration of minus infinity to infinity small x fx of small x dx. X is here is a function of is the variable of integration. It is integrated over the entire range of values from minus infinity to infinity, and x is also multiplied here. Now we know that we can say that integration of fx dx over minus infinity to plus infinity is 1, because the density function covers all possible. The density function ranging from minus infinity to infinity integrated will be 1, but here we multiply an extra x term. This is all, this is approximately equal to, if it is a, this is for a continuous random variable. For a discrete random variable, it is approximately equal to sigma xi px at xi at for every I possible. Every I possible is basically in continuous random variable, all possible values are minus infinity to infinity. But in the bus example that I gave, if I know that the bus is going to come between 15 minutes of me arriving at the bus stop, then I can replace this minus infinity to infinity by 0 to 15. That is what I know about the range. And if I don't know the range, I can integrate over its entire domain. Then there is a second moment of a random variable, the variance. The variance of a random variable is a measure of the degree of randomness about the mean. So it is the expectation of x minus mu x whole square. This is known as a variance. And we know that the expectation of a certain quantity x is x multiplied by the density function integrated over the entire domain. So to find out the expectation of this square term, I will just put x minus mu x in this, x minus mu x square here. So the variance of x is integration minus infinity to infinity x minus mu x square fx dx. Or in the case of discrete random variables, it is a summation that xi minus mu x square. There is no I in this mu x term because the mu x is the mean. It is fixed for a particular random variable. So xi minus mu x whole square px of xi over all I, and it can be derived that it is the expectation of x square minus the mean square, where the alternate expression is for discrete random variables. The last expression is exact for both types of random variables and is a very useful result. The standard deviation is defined as the square root of the variance. Now, the variance will always be a positive number because x minus mu x whole square is a positive number. So, the expectation of that number will always be positive. So the standard deviation is defined as the square root of that number and the positive square root obviously, and the coefficient of variation is defined as the standard deviation divided by the mean. It is a ratio basically. So variance has a unit of, suppose my random variable has a unit of meter, then the variance will have a unit of meter square because it is an expectation of a squared term here. But the standard deviation again we take a root and we again bring down the unit to meter. So the coefficient of variation is a dimensionless quantity, and it is very important in structural reliability because generally when we are suppose modeling the stress yield stress of my steel as a random variable, I will define its mean and its standard deviation generally. So for example, the mean is 250 MPa and the standard deviation is 10%. 10% is of course this ratio multiplied by 100. That is how I will get the percentage. This is in terms of a fraction, and if I multiply with 100, I will get a percentage. So that is this is about the variance and the standard deviation and the coefficient of variation. The third moment of a random variable is called the skewness. The measure of skewness or lack of symmetry of a distribution is given by the third central moment about the mean. Why is it called third central moment? It means that it is about the mean. So it is the expectation of x minus mean whole cubed. So the expectation by now you should expect this expression should be minus infinity to infinity x minus mu x cube fx dx, or in the case of discrete random variables, it will be like this. The fourth moment of a random variable, kurtosis, it is a measure of the flatness of a distribution that is given by the fourth central moment. In the exact same way, e of x minus mu x whole to the power 4 is integration of minus infinity to infinity x minus mu x whole to the power 4 fx dx. And for the discrete random variables, it will be like this. So now we are going to look at another example. Consider a random variable x that represents the outcome of rolling a fair six-sided dice. The possible outcomes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We want to find the mean, that is expected value, and the variance of x. I'll wait for 5 minutes for you to try this out. Okay, so here is the solution. First step is to find the mean. The mean or expected value of a discrete random variable, as I mentioned before, mu x, e of x is sigma small x into p of capital X equal to x, which is what the probability density function means, or the probability mass function. P of x given capital X equal to small x is a probability mass function used for discrete random variables. This I have to sum over all possible x, where x are the possible values of the random variable, and p capital X equal to x is the probability of each value. For a fair die, all outcomes will be equally probable. So each outcome x has 1 to 6 has an equal probability of 1 by 6. Therefore, mu of x is sigma x into 1 by 6 summed over x equal to 1 to 6. That is x. So for x equal to 1, it's 1 into 1 plus 6. For x equal to 2, it's 2 into 1 by 6, 3 into 1 by 6 plus 4 into 1 by 6 plus 5 into 1 by 6 plus 6 into 1 by 6. So total we get 21 by 6, that is 3.5. So the mean of the random variable x is 3.5. Now we are going to find the variance. The variance of the discrete random variable, as we said discussed, is sigma x square. It is also denoted as sigma x square because sigma x is our notation for standard deviation. Since standard deviation is the square root of variance, the variance is often denoted as sigma square x. Is the expectation of x square minus expectation of x whole square. This expectation of x is mu x. This expression is what we have shown before. This expression of x square minus mean square, and the mean is the ex, so this can be expressed as e of x square minus e of x whole square. So we need to calculate the expectation of x square. The expectation of value of x square is just, we will in this formula we are going to just replace small x by x square. So outcome for each outcome of x, we'll get the expression of x square as 1 square into 1 by 6 plus 2 square into 1 by 6 plus 3 square into 1 by 6 plus 4 square into 1 by 6 plus 5 square into 1 by 6 plus 6 square into 1 by 6. Calculating that, we will get 91 by 6, 15.17. Now we are going to use the variance formula. The mean we have already calculated is 3.5. So sigma square x square is 91 by 6 minus 3.5 square, that we get as 2.917. So the variance of the random variable x is approximately 2.917. This approximation comes because it is a recurring decimal number. Mean is 3.5 and variance is 2.917. Now if we wanted the standard deviation, it would be 2.917, the root of that. So I'll calculate 2.917, true, that is 1.7. So the standard deviation is 1.7. And if I want the coefficient of variation, what was the definition? Standard deviation divided by mean. So 1.7 divided by 3.5, it is 0.48. So it is 48. The coefficient of variation is 48%, almost 50%. That is very high coefficient of variation. What we in general are going to see in civil engineering modeling of random variables, we will see the standard deviations of the order 10%, 20%, maximum 25% for a very uncertain material. So okay, now we are going to look at some common univariate probability distribution. Now, what is a probability distribution? It is the pattern, or it is the density function or the cumulative distribution function of a random variable. So why we need these distributions are, these are the distributions that are actually used to characterize an uncertain random variable. Whatever I'm going to load, I'm going to model for in an uncertainty quantification problem or a structural reliability problem. For example, suppose there is a wind load coming on my structure, and I want to model it as and as a distribution. So I will have the distribution pattern, like the distribution type. These are the common univariate probability distribution types, and then I will have its mean and its standard deviation and whatever it takes to characterize the distribution. So a probability distribution is characterized by CDF, cumulative distribution function. That is what we have defined. If capital X of small x is P, probability of capital X less than equal to small x. Small x is a number, capital X is my random variable. Or the PDF, probability density function. So if I know the CDF, I know the PDF, because taking the derivative of the CDF, I know the PDF. And why is this or? Because if I know the PDF, I know the CDF because I know it by integrating. So either knowing either of the two is enough, because they are enough to characterize a single probability distribution. For one probability distribution, if I know the CDF, I automatically know the PDF, and vice versa. So the PDF of the probability distribution is probability of x lying between a and b is integration of a to b fx dx. So this is my density function. And the mean, or just knowing the CTF is just knowing the CTF will be enough. Knowing any of these actually is enough. Then I can know the mean, variance, and they are often, but just knowing the mean and variance is not enough. If I know the mean and variance, they can have several different distributions. I also need to know the distribution type, or the coefficient of variation. So these or is between the variance and the coefficient of variation. If I know the mean and the variance, I automatically know the coefficient of variation. And if I know the mean and the coefficient, like if I know any two of these, I can find out the other three, because the three are connected by formula. Now I am looking at common univariate. What does the term univariate mean? That means that there is only one random variable here. So the first common univariate the first thing that we think of is the binomial distribution. The binomial distribution gives the probability of exactly small x successes in small n trials. Its probability mass function is given by p of x. Capital X equal to x is NCX. This is the combination term is NCX, p to the power x into 1 minus p to the power n minus x, and x ranges between 0 to n, because if there is n trials of an event, I can have 0 successes, I can have 1 success, I can have up to n successes, I cannot have more than that. So suppose my event is tossing a coin. I am tossing a coin x times, and I want the probability. I'm tossing a coin, suppose 10 times, and I want the probability of getting two heads, and head is my success event. So probability of x equal to 2 will be 10c2. Probability of each head and tail is half, so p half to the power 2 into 1 minus half, that is also half to the power 10 minus 2. So the expression will 10c2 half to the power 8 into half to the power 2. And the cumulative distribution function is a sigma of this, that is not available in a closed form. Sigma y is my, this is a dummy variable that is used here to count. Like y is my, like we have an integration variable over which I'm integrating. That is like that we have a summation variable, that y goes from 0 1 2 3 to x, 0 to x. So n c y p to the power y 1 minus p to the power n minus y, and x goes from 1 to n, and y goes from 0 to, sorry, x goes from 0 to n, and y goes from 0 to x, where here it is is the binomial coefficient. The parameters are the number of n, of independent, the number n of independent trials, and the probability p is the probability of success per trial. So in one trial, like one tossing a coin, I know the probability of getting a head is half, so my small p will be half. Now, once I know this CDF or the PDF, I can automatically find out the mean from the formula, that I can say sigma x into f of x. So that is how from that calculation we can get the mean is np, and the variation is np into 1 minus p. These values should eventually, like we are going to use these so much that eventually we end up memorizing these, though we can always derive it separately. The binomial distribution is applicable when there are only two discrete alternatives per independent trials with probability p and 1 minus p respectively. A useful property is this b of n minus p is a binomial, uh, binomial function of n1p. So b of n1p plus b of n2p is b of n1 plus n2p. And the multinomial distribution applies when there are more than two discrete outcomes possible. So in this, you can see there are only two possibilities, p and 1 minus p, so head or tails. But if I have, what if I'm rolling a die, 1 2 3 4 5 6, I cannot incorporate this into this formula, so I need the multinomial for that. I don't think I've added that. Okay, the multinomial formula is just an extension of the binomial one. We won't need that much in structural reliability, but it is just good to know, so you can look at it in any standard probability book. Then there is a geometric distribution. The geometric distribution gives the probability that the nth trial is a success, given that the first n minus 1 trials were failure. Its probability mass function. Why are we talking about probability mass functions? Because binomial distribution was a discrete random variable. Geometric random variable is also a discrete random variable. Its probability mass function and its cumulative distribution functions are p of capital N. Here, capital N is my random variable. You can write it as capital X, doesn't matter. P of capital N equal to small n is 1 minus p to the power n minus 1 into p. Where does this come from? See, what is happening is, suppose I am tossing a coin for 10 times, and I want to know that I'm saying that the probability that no, not 10 times, I'm repeatedly tossing a coin, and I get to know that my probability of, like, I get a heads for the first time on my seventh trial. So what does that mean? That on my first trial I got a tails, I got on my second trial I got a tails, in all my first six trials I got tails. So this 1 minus p is my probability of getting a tail, and I am raising that to the power of n minus 1 because I'm getting a success on the seventh trial, and 7 minus 1, 6. That is the first six trials were tails. So 1 minus p to the power 6 into 1 half. That means on the seventh trial, I got my heads finally. And this p of capital N, that is equal to small n, the CDF is, again, it does not have a, it does have a closed form, because we know that this is a sum of a GP, like geometric progression, I equal to 1 to n minus p to the power I minus 1 p, and this I sum is the I is going from 1 to n, so I know that from geometric progression formula I get 1 minus 1 minus p to the power n. Unlike the binomial distribution, the CDF, where the CDF did not have a closed form solution, it is just left in the term of a sigma term. Here I have this. The parameters are the number n of independent trials and the probability p of success per trial, that is a constant. The moments are expected. The expectation on the mean is 1 by p, and the variance is 1 minus p by p square. The next is a negative binomial. The negative binomial distribution gives the probability that the kth occurrence of a success occurs at the tth trial. This is also known as the Pascal distribution. The probability mass function is P of capital T equal to small t. Here, capital T is my random variable. Is t minus 1 c k minus 1, there is a combination binomial coefficient, into 1 minus p to the power t minus k into p to the power k. The parameters are the number k of successes, the probability p of success per trial, and the number t of trials before k successes. So let us interpret that. Suppose I'm tossing a coin, I'm repeatedly tossing a coin, and I know that I'm getting the third success on the 10th trial. So what other data I know? I know that I get a heads on the 10th trial, and I know that in the previous 9 trials I have got two heads and 7 tails. So I, in 9 trials I have 2 heads and 7 tails, and I don't know the order of that. It can be anything. It can be head, tails, tails 7 times. It can be head, then 6 tails, then a head. It can be anything. So t minus 1 here is 9, k minus 1 here is 2. So 9c2, 1 minus p to the power this t minus k is here 7. So this is the arrangement of my tails. So 9c2 half to the power 7, that is my arrangement of tails. So I get that probability, and then the probability, and the other 3 times I've got heads, that is 2 times before and 1 on the 10th, on the kth trial. So to p to the power k, p to the, that will be p to the power 3. So it will be 9c2 half to the power 7 into half to the power 3. The half to the power 7 stands for the 7 tails I've got, half to the power 3 stands for the 3 heads I've got, and this 9C2 shows the distribution of tails in the first 9 trials. Now the mean of this is k by p. The variance is k into 1 minus p by p squared. Interestingly, this mean and variance, the geometric distribution is basically, the negative binomial is basically a k times magnification of geometric distribution. Geometric is about the first success and negative binomial is about the kth success. So interestingly, the mean of this and this, you will see that here the mean and variance just gets multiplied by the factor k. So the number of trials can be interpreted also as a number of time units. Other forms also exist. The Poisson's distribution, it is another discrete distribution. Negative binomial was also discrete. This is also discrete. From exponential, we are going to look at the continuous distributions. This distribution gives the probability of a number of occurrences xt of a random event in a given interval t, given that the mean rate of occurrences is known. The probability mass function and the CDF are pxt of x is nu t to the power x by x factorial e to the power minus nu t. The parameters are the mean occurrence rate per unit time or space, per unit time or space units nu, the time or space interval t, the average number lambda equal to nu t of the events in t, and the number of xt of occurrences t. And this is the CDF does not have a closed form solution. So here r is the summation variable. R ranges from 0 to x. Poisson's distribution always goes from 0 to x. So this is the summation of the probability mass function sigma r equal to 0 to x nu t to the power r by r factorial e to the power minus nu t. The moments are expression of x is nu t and variance of x is also nu t. So the standard deviation will be root nu t. The Poisson distribution results from approximating the binomial distribution BNP as n tends to infinity and BP is small. So it has and by replacing the number of trials in the binomial by the time interval. The relationship is given by np equal to nu t in the limit n equal tends to infinity and p tends to 0. In practice, this is satisfied if say n equal to 50 and p less than equal to zero point 0.1, or n equal to 100 and p less than equal to 0.05. That means that trying out a huge number of trials and the probability of success in each trial is very less. The Poisson's distribution has wide applications and it is not merely an approximation for the binomial distribution. When the Poisson's distribution is used in terms of time or space units with independence of events, a Poisson process results. We will look at that later. Note that nu t to the power 0 by 0 factorial equal to 1. And Poisson's distribution has this useful property that Poisson's distribution of lambda 1 plus Poisson's distribution of lambda 2 is Poisson's distribution of lambda 1 plus lambda 2. Now we move on to continuous random variables, starting with the exponential function. This basically, the exponential function is also called a continuous approximation of the geometric function. So for events occurring according to a Poisson's process, the exponential distribution describes the probability of the time to the first occurrence of an event. So, for events occurring according to Poisson's process, the exponential distribution describes the probability of the time to the first occurrence of an event. Why am I saying this a continuous approximation of the geometric distribution? In geometric distribution, we are interested about the first success of a number of trials, and in exponential, it is a continuous version. That is, we are looking at the first occurrence of an event, but my random variable is continuous. That is, for example, like that bus, like a bus comes once in 15 minutes, as I said. So 0 to 15, it will follow. I'm looking for the first time the bus comes after I've arrived. So that will follow an exponential distribution. The probability density and this the PDF and the CDF are, here we are back to probability density, not probability mass anymore, because it's a continuous random variable. P of capital T equal to small t equal to nu e to the power minus nu t, and the CDF is, we can integrate this from minus infinity to infinity, from minus infinity to t, we will get 1 minus e to the power minus nu t. So that means p of capital T greater than equal to a specific time t is e to the power minus nu t. The parameters of the exponential distributions are the mean rate of occurrence nu and the time or space interval t. The moments are 1 minus nu, and the variance is 1 minus nu square. And delta t here is the average time between arrivals or the mean life. The exponential distribution is the continuous analog of the geometric distribution, as I said. Since a Poisson process is stationary by definition, any starting time can be used, and hence t can refer to the inter-arrival time, which is therefore exponentially distributed. Then this is the most important distribution in statistics, the normal or the Gaussian distribution. The normal distribution is one that arises frequently in practice as a limiting case of the other probability distributions. It is also a reasonable model for observations of many physical properties and processes, that is which is why it is so relevant to us in the area of structural reliability. Whenever we are modeling parameters, be it geometric, material properties, loads or anything, approximating it as a normal distribution is all pretty much always a good choice. Anything else, of course, if you know some additional things about the distribution, you can model just other distributions like log normal, gumbel, which we are going to look at later just in about 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But modeling them as normal distributions pretty much always safe, and that is often commonly done, and it also makes calculations easier because it has a lot of interesting properties. This probability density function and CDF functions are a bit complicated. No one is going to calculate anything on these two. It is just for the sake of knowledge. Fx is 1 by 2 pi to the power half sigma x, where sigma is the standard deviation, exponential minus half to the power x minus mu x by sigma x whole square. So mu x is my mean and sigma x is my standard deviation. So the the normal distribution, the first amongst all previous distribution, is the distribution to be defined by its mean and standard deviation. What we did in all these are, we defined the distribution first, we defined its PDF and CDF, and then we calculated the mean and variance in in binomial, in geometric, in negative binomial, in Poisson's, in exponential. But here we explicitly define it in terms of its mean and standard deviation. And the CDF has absolutely no closed form because this integral is not possible to be calculated. So we just leave it at that. However, there are many approximations. For example, these are some density functions. This is the Fs, the density function. This is, all of these have mean about 0. So normal distribution looks like this. The mean is 0, and these are, as we vary the sigma, this is how it varies. For example, the sigma is zero point 0.5, it is a sharp thin curve like this. The sigma is 1, it looks like this. Sigma is 2, it becomes much flatter, and like this there are several patterns it follows. And there's this important central limit theorem that we have to mention right now, because the famous central limit theorem states that the probability distribution for the sum of a large number of random variables, whatever distribution may they follow, suppose I have 20, 30, 100 random variables, all of them following their own distributions, but their sum approaches the normal distribution irrespective of the individual distribution of the random variables. A lot of work has been done on this in the previous century. Uh, then we look at the log normal distribution. In the log normal distribution, the natural logarithm, it is basically the natural logarithm of the random variable x rather than itself. So x has a my like, if x is a log normally distributed random variable, the ln x, that is logarithm of x, will have a normal distribution. The probability density function here are this, and the again the CDF has no explicit form. The parameters lambda here, these parameters are not the mean and standard deviation. Okay, these are just two parameters, lambda and epsilon. Lambda is mu of ln x, and epsilon square is the sigma square of ln x. So ln x, since ln x is following a normal log is a normal following a normal distribution, you can see that this is like this part is similar to a normal distribution where ln x is following the normal distribution. This logarithm is a natural logarithm, so the base is e, not 10. This is how log normal PDFs look like. They are a little skewed. They are a little skewed about the mean here are all one, but they are, and unlike the normal distribution where it was symmetric, the log normal distribution is not symmetric. They are skewed. So this is there are the lambdas are zero. So the x this basically the normal mean here are one, but the parameter lambda is zero, and for epsilon varying, this is a very small epsilon point one, it is sharp, then it becomes a little flatter, then it becomes more flat, and so on. Then there are some extreme value distributions. Type one, they are defined like that. Extreme value distribution type one Gumbel, type two Frechet, and type three Weibull. And okay, so before I move on to these. That is all the distribution that we are going to look at. The Gumbel, Frechet, and Weibull also have their own distributions, their own PDF, CDF, mean, standard deviation. We are not going to the details right now. We will use those as and when we need them in following classes. So that is all about distribution. Before I move into modeling of parameters, I'll wait and see if you have any questions from. This is where it started from. This phi here is refers to the as the CDF of uh, a normal random variable. So here ln x is a normal variable, so that's why. And sigma, lambda, and epsilon are the mean and standard deviation of the ln x normal variable. Here, I should have mentioned here that this is also known as capital phi of x. Okay, so and move on to the next topic. This is just a brief mention. Modeling parameters in structural reliability. Uncertainty introduced in parameter of system under study. In structural reliability, uncertainty is introduced in as many parameters of the system under study. Loads and resistance are modeled with a probability distribution, a mean set at the expected value. Now, of course, mean is also called the expected value. What does this mean? That in general, during analysis in structure or in structural design, what do? We s- we say that the length, that the dimension of this beam is the like the cross section of this beam is 300 cross 400 mm. The yield stress of steel is 250 MPa, so on. So these values are what we take for granted, like we take at the fixed value. So this is taken as the mean, and then we introduce a coefficient of variation, saying that the value may not be exactly fixed at that value, say 10%, 5%, etc. And then we also have to define a probability distribution. If no distribution is mentioned, we automatically model it as a random, as a normal random variable. Examples of load parameters are magnitude of force applied, angular frequency of force if in case of dynamic loading. Examples of resistance parameters are cross-sectional area, Young's modulus, density, yield stress, and like this here, etc. And commonly used distributions to model loads are the extreme value distributions, the Gumbel, Frechet, and Weibull, and to model resistances are normal and log normal generally. So we'll look at this in later classes. I mean, this class is just reviewing the probability and statistics theories that we are going to need, and this is basically the purpose. Since we are going to need this modeling of parameters in structural reliability analysis, that's why the knowing having a good background in probability and statistics is important in this course. Now we look at jointly distributed random variables. So if I have more than one random variable, so far we have looked at univariate, so we can look at bivariate, trivariate random variables. A joint probability distribution, if an event is the result of two or more continuous random variables x1 and x2, say the non-zero probability that the event occurs for values less than or equal to x1 and small x1 and x2 is described by the joint CDF, joint cumulative distributive function. This is denoted as f x1 x2, capital like this, and bracket, inside brackets we'll write small x1 comma small x2 equal to capital probability of capital X1 being smaller than small x1, and capital X2 being smaller than small x2, union of these. So both of these must occur. That is how we define the joint CDF. This will be greater than 0, of course, and it is a joint integration of over two variables, du dv. U and v are the variables of integration. U goes from minus infinity to x1 and v goes from minus infinity to x2, say. So u actually ranges over the parameter domain of random variable x1 and v ranges from the parameter domain of x2, where small f x1 x2, this term is the joint probability density function. And this that is how we define this. This can be defined if the partial derivatives are set small f x1 x2 of, sorry, small f of capital x1 x2 inside bracket small x1 x2 is limit of this, that is x1 is between capital X1 ranges between small x1 and small x1 plus a small perturbation in x1, and capital X2 is between x2 and a small perturbation from x2, like a small variation I'm allowing. I can't just say x1 is equal to, we can say that x1 is equal to capital X1 is equal to small x1 and capital X2 is equal to small x2, but that's not how we do in maths. We allow a small variation. So that is partial double differentiation of f x1 x2 dx1 dx2, and these are some properties. Capital F x1 x2 at minus infinity comma minus infinity is 0. Why is this so? What does this mean? We are going to put this here. So this will, if I put this here, f of x1 x2 of minus infinity comma minus infinity means probability of x capital X1 being less than equal to minus infinity and capital X2 being less than equal to minus infinity. Now minus infinity is the lowermost bound of all possible continuous random variables. So x1 cannot be less than minus infinity and x2 cannot be less than minus infinity, so the probability of this event is 0. And this event p of x1 x2 plus infinity, this last probability is 1. Why? Because probability of x1 being less than infinity and x2 being less than infinity is 1, because plus infinity is the upper bound of all possible values x1 and x2 can take. So this must happen. Well, I know that capital X1 is for sure going to be less than infinity and capital X2 is also for sure going to be less than infinity. So this joint CDF at infinity infinity will be 1, and this is important. Even if one is set as infinity is one is set as minus infinity, it will be 0. The joint distribution will be 0, because if I put this minus, if I use the CDF as at minus infinity comma y, what does that mean? X1 will be less than minus infinity and x2 will be less than equal to y. Now x2 being less than equal to y will actually have a probability, but since x1 cannot be less than minus infinity, this union event or the event of both of these happening together will be 0, and vice versa. And this, if I put one of the variables as infinity, then I basically remove that random variable from the equation, from the joint distribution. Like if a capital f of x1 x2 at infinity y means this term x1 less than equal to infinity becomes redundant, because I know x1 is going to be less than equal infinity. Then it becomes the probability of x2 less than equal to y. So it is the CDF, it is the marginal CDF of y, or the in CDF of y if it was treated as a univariate random variable. We are going to look at marginal distributions, marginal probability distributions. Anyway, it will be the marginal CDF. So similarly, if I put x comma infinity, then I will get fx1 of x. Now I'm looking at conditional probability distribution. If the probability that x1 ranges between x1 and a small perturbation is a function of x2, the following holds. Limit delta x1 x2 tends to 0. Probability of x1 less than capital X1 less than equal to small x1 plus delta small x1, given x2 less than a capital X2 less than equal to small x2 plus delta x2, is the conditional distribution of x1 conditioned on x2. So capital X1 given x2 inside bracket small x1 given small x2. So f is a, as a probability over the infinitesimal region delta x1 delta x2, we will get this. This is the PDF. This is the conditional PDF. F of x1 given x2 is the joint distribution of x1 and x2 divided by the marginal distribution of x2. And similarly, the conditional distribution of x2 given x1 will be the joint distribution of x1 and x2 divided by f of this divided by the marginal distribution of x1. If x1 and x2 are independent, it will make no difference if there is a conditional. So f of x1 x2 will be f of x1 into f of x2. This is a very important property. If suppose two events like I'm tossing a coin, I'm rolling a die simultaneously. If I'm toss, they are independent. Like I can get heads, tails, and I can get all possible combination 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they have no relation with each other. So suppose I have the distribution of my tossing coin event and I have the distribution of my rolling die event. To get the joint distribution, I can simply multiply them. But I cannot do that if the two events were related. So, for example, suppose suppose my I'm tossing two coins simultaneously, and I define one event as getting a heads in the first coin, and I define another event as getting a tails. So they are not independent of each other, because getting a tails and getting a head in the first coin do depend on each other, and they cannot happen simultaneously either. So I cannot just multiply the probability distributions in that case. Okay, now we look at marginal probability distributions. A marginal probability density function may be obtained from the joint density function by integrating over the other variables. So I am invoking total probability theorem that I have defined before. So fx1 is my integration of minus infinity to infinity, the joint, the conditional distribution of x1 x2 given x2 equal to minus infinity to infinity f x1 x2 dx2. So the other variable dx2, I integrate over minus infinity to infinity, so I covered all possible ranges. So I am left with only the distribution function, density function of the variable x1. If I had n random variables, the joint distribution of n random variables, to get the marginal distribution function of density function of x1, I would have to integrate over all the other variables. So it will be an n minus 1 dimensional integration. Dx2 will go from minus infinity to infinity, dx3 will go from minus infinity to infinity, up to like that, up to dn it will go from minus infinity to plus infinity. If x1 and x2 are independent, the conditional and marginal distributions will be identical, because they it won't matter whether whatever is happening in x2 doesn't affect x1 at all. So that if x1 given x2 is equal to fx1, if x1 x2 is fx1 into x2, etc. In general, this relation will be take this form. And now I will look at the mean variance. Just like we did before, when we defined univariate distributions, we defined the CDF, PDF, and then we moved on to the moments, right? The mean, the standard deviation, coefficient of variations, and so on. It is defined in a quite similar manner. So the expectation of x1, to get the expectation of x1, I am going to multiply with x1. If x1 x2 of this is a joint density function, I will integrate x1 and x2 over minus infinity to infinity. So this is the first moment of x1, or equivalently the mean value of x1 over all x2. The fact that this is so can be seen from the first double integral term, which can be rewritten as this integral minus infinity to infinity x1. Uh, Again, I put a bracket to take a separate out this, so I take the x1 out and I take this x1 out, like dx1 and x1 I take out, and I write this one in the middle. So fx1 x2 dx2 minus infinity to infinity, this I know as the marginal distribution function, right? Just like marginal density function, just like what I defined. So this in this bracket, within third brackets part is fx1, so it is the density function of x1. I multiply it with x1 and integrate it over x1 to get the mean of x1. So and also the conditional mean of x1 is given by given that x2 equal to x2. Suppose I know one value of I know the exact value of the second event, and I want to find the mean of the first event. It won't be the same as the unconditioned mean. If they're independent, it won't matter. But otherwise, mean of x1 given x2 is expectation of x1 given x2 equal to x2 is minus infinity to infinity x1 into the marginal density function integrated over dx1. The variance, it is defined in a similar manner. It is extended in the basic definition that we defined long back. So this is how we are defining the mean x into fx dx. Here what we are doing is x1 into d into the marginal fx1 into dx1, and I'm integrating exact the same thing we did. And here also what we did is it was the expectation of x minus, it was the expression of the x minus mean of x whole squared. So this was the expectation, this was the expression. So what we do here is to get the variance of x1, we do expectation of x1 minus mean of x1 whole square. That is a double integration. Inside it, I will write x1 minus mu x1 whole square into the joint density function x, and then I will integrate it from dx1 dx2 up to minus infinity, because this there will be, and that will be minus infinity to infinity variance of x1 given x2 fx2 x2 dx, or the equal to variance of x1. Here the marginal variance of x1 is, this is not the marginal variance, this is the overall variance of x1 given given the joint distribution fx1 x2 is a variance of x1 given x2 is variance of x1 given x2 equal to x2 equal to expectation of x1 minus mu x1 given x2 whole square given x2 equal to x2, and the expression will be integration of minus infinity to infinity x1 minus mu x1 given x2 whole square fx1. This is a conditional distribution density function into dx1. The covariance and correlation is another important, like correlation covariance we have already covariance or correlation comes, it is related to the variance, but it is comes when there are more than one random variables. So the above expressions for the mean and variance are symmetrical in x1 and x2 because there is no bias. All the expression that we derived could be just reversed for x1 and x2. I could just substitute and x1 with x2 and x2 with x1, and I will get a valid expression. A further elementary moment exists in involving both x1 and x2. This is the covariance. It has the same dimension as the variance, that is the square of the unit. Covariance of x1 x2 is the expectation of x1 minus mu x1 into x2 minus mu x2. Expectation of this whole thing. Mu x1 is a mu is the expected value of the first random variable, mu x2 is the expected value of the second random variable, and the expectation of this whole quantity is called as known as the covariance. It is from the definition of expectation we can write it as in double integral x1 minus mu x1 x2 minus mu x2, the conditional the joint density function, and I integrate it dx1 and dx2 from minus infinity to plus infinity. Further, the correlation coefficient is defined based on this covariance. Once we have the covariance, we write it as covariance divided by variance of x into variance of x1 into variance of x2 whole root. And if we put the root inside, we will get this the root of variance of x1 is the standard deviation of x1 sigma x1, and the variance of x2 will be root of that will be the say standard deviation of x2, so it will be covariance of x1 x2 divided by standard deviation of x1 into standard deviation of x2. This term coefficient correlation coefficient ranges between -1 to 1, and it is a measure of the linearity of this of the linearity of the relationship. So it will be minus 1 or plus 1 in case they are very highly linearly related. For example, suppose I have a relation x equal to mu x plus c, then the and mu is mu x plus c and mu is a positive number, then the correlation coefficient will be 1 plus 1. If mu is a negative quantity, it will be -1, and if they are not related linearly, the correlation coefficient will tend towards 0. So I think that's it for the review of probability theory. Uh, if there are any questions, and next class we will look at the limit state functions and partial safety factors. Tomorrow we'll meet at 7 o'clock again. Okay. So I will end this class now.